Welcome to Connecting Learning to Business Outcomes. I am Erin Osborne, Operations Manager with Nexa Learning. I will be working behind the scenes during this morning's webinar to monitor your questions and comments in the chat box. As a reminder, this webinar does count as SHRM and HRCI credit for full webinar attendance. We will be sending an email with the recording of the webinar, a copy of the PowerPoint, and the credit codes. Now, let me introduce you to our presenter, Nancy Polsky, Vice President of Nexa Learning. Nancy is a senior leader in corporate learning and organizational development who specializes in enhancing employee and organizational capabilities through employee development, leadership training, and coaching. She is a recognized author, speaker, and industry award winner who served as an advisor to Chief Learning Officer magazine. Nancy is a certified ROI professional from ROI Institute and an International Coaching Federation professional coach. Additionally, she brings certifications in positive psychology and mindfulness-based stress reduction to the measurable work she does with corporate leaders and executive team. Nancy, the floor, or should I say the camera, is yours.
Thank you, Erin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Polsky. My work sits at the intersection of learning and leadership and organizational performance. So a big part of what I help clients do is to move beyond learning as an isolated activity and towards learning as a business lever. So just today, I read in the Harvard Business Review that over $359 billion a year is spent on learning across organizations in the US. And most people don't actually see the value in that. So it means that we need to ask better questions up front. What is the business need? What performance gap are we actually trying to address? And what would people need to do differently if that was successful? And the lens that I'm bringing today is not academic, it's not measurement for measurement's sake, but it's really a practitioner lens, just like yours. I want this to be a really useful session for HR and L&D leaders. So for those of you that are trying to build credibility with stakeholders about being realistic and making sure that you have access to data and the time to create an evaluation plan. So let me ground this into what's in this for you. So why connect learning to business and talent outcomes? So many of us HR and L&D folks know this all too well. You deliver a solution, participation is strong, feedback scores look great, people tell you that they loved it, and then a leader from the business asks the question that changes the energy in the room. So what? Did it actually anything improve? The question is really at the heart of what I do and what this session is about. So today I'm not going to argue that activity metrics are useless. Completion rates do matter. Attendance, participation, it does matter. Satisfaction, impressions, that data does matter. But none of them on their own answers the business question that leaders are asking, even if they're not asking it, that they need it, the so what question. They need to know whether the learning, whether our solutions contributed to better performance or stronger execution and better outcomes for the business, whether it's business metrics or HR talent metrics. So our focus today is really meant to be very practical, how we connect learning to business outcomes in ways that are realistic, credible, not overinflated, not over-engineered. So how we move beyond reporting activity and start telling really a stronger performance story. So this focuses on L&D, learning and development solutions, but I would really argue that what I'm teaching here today is the same for all talent, all HR types of initiative. If HR is launching a employee engagement survey, if talent acquisition is offering hiring leaders a new tool, it's telling a story, a so what story that's really critical. So my goal is that at the end of this hour, and you'll have a clear framework that you can use in your design of your programs to strengthen the not only the learning and the so what, but your credibility as a value-added partner to your business leaders. Okay, so first I want this to be an interactive session. We have a lot of people on, but the easiest way to participate today is the chat feature and the quick polls that we'll be having, and the reaction feature will also be having Q&A at the end. So I will give you some specific prompts when I want you to use the chat. Erin and I will be looking at that. So if something comes up that you want to hold for the end, you can feel free to note it in the Q&A. So the topic today is about measurement, but I want us to really experience this as a very human and practical. So let's start with a quick pulse check if we can go to our first poll. So if you could please let us know who's here today. I want to get a sense of, is our audience mostly HR generalists or other areas of HR, mostly learning and development people, maybe sales enablement support, or external folks, consultants or vendors outside the organization, or maybe somebody else. We'll just give you a quick minute to get a pulse of who's here today. And Erin, you can let me know when to shut that down.
Okay, I'm gonna end the poll.
Okay, so the majority of our folks are HR outside of L&D, but we have about a third of the people on today who are L&D specialists. Great. So what I want to leave you with today is the learning objectives. I'll move to the next. So I want to be really clear about the difference between activity metrics and outcome metrics. They're not the same thing, and too often they get blended together. So I want to help you to identify the real business need, and if there's a specific performance gap that the learning effort is meant to support. Even if no one in the business, in the executive leadership is asking you for it, I still want you to be able to strategically solve for that. So if we skip that step, everything else that follows is weak. So we'll talk about aligning those learning goals to existing organizational KPIs in a way that will be realistic and defensible. Now, not everything needs to be a brand new metric. Really just looking at existing leading and lagging indicators will help us tell a cogent, credible story over time. I'm going to leave you with a practical framework. You'll be able to use it immediately, whether you are designing a new program or you're repositioning an existing one, whether you're an L&D person who is looking to do this with learning metrics and solutions, or you're an HR generalist thinking about this in other areas outside of learning. So to improve the report story of measurement and evaluation. So on the next slide, let's just walk through how the agenda will flow to get us there for today. So here's what we'll cover. We'll cover moving from a problem to a framework to application. We'll start with why so many measurement efforts break down or are limited. And I'll show you a simple line of sight approach that makes the work more strategic, less complicated. So from there, I'm going to share 3 examples from my own practice, one in infrastructure, one in a municipal setting, and one in a healthcare organization. I always think examples make things easy to apply. And we will still have a couple of interactions along the way. And again, the Q&A at the end. So if you're here looking for the perfect ROI formula, this is not it today. But if you're looking for a more credible way to connect learning to business performance, you're in the right session. Okay, so let's move on. We do have another poll. So whether you're a learning person or an HR person, what are the learning measurements that you are most expected to report. You can select all that apply here. Most folks need to report reach, participation rates. Some have to report completion, especially if you're responsible for compliance or ethics. Completion as part of the audience. Satisfaction, smiley sheets, as we say. Behavior change on the job, or business KPIs, or talent KPIs, or some combination of the above. So if most folks have answered the poll, then we can close that out. And what we see is that about 40% of you do report the participation rates, and a completion rate, that is a percentage of the audience, that is the target audience, who've completed their learning. About 30% focus on the satisfaction of those participants. A little bit less, about 22%, is looking at behavior. That's good. It's harder to get to, and I appreciate we've got a good number of folks looking at that. And about 17% link the learning solution to business or talent KPIs or outcomes. So like this, what I usually do see is a strong tilt towards the completion and attendance and satisfaction, the ones we saw. Sometimes there is an interest in business outcomes, but often the reporting habits that we have are still really anchored in activity. And I just want to be clear that is understandable, because activity data is available. It's clean. It's ours. It's controlled by the learning team. It's easy to put on a slide. But the problem is it rarely answers the real questions, the so what questions that business leaders, HR leaders are really needing to ask. So not just, did people show up? Did they like it? But did this move anything, the so what, in the business? Okay, so if your poll results skew towards activity like mine do, it's not that it's a failure. It's simply the reality of where we're operating, which is why today's topic matters so much. So if you could jump into chat informally here and note which stakeholders are you expected to report out your findings to? Is it the L&D leader, if you're an L&D specialist here with us today? Is it the HR leadership, if you're an HR specialist? Maybe it's a business sponsor, VPs, and other executives in the business. So it looks like you've got a lot of C-level folks that you are expected to report out to. Great. So I often find, frankly, that I'm the one driving the deep measurement that's going on. That is, those executives, or those business leaders, in my experience, are often not expecting to see ROI on KPIs for learning solutions. But it doesn't mean that we don't forget about them. In fact, it means that allows us a strategic advantage opportunity, so that we could delight our clients if we do this right. So this brings us to this tension that I want to talk about right now. So the tension is on one side, on the left, is that L&D often reports what's available in operational attendance, completions, participation, satisfaction. We just looked at that, and they do tell us something. Those metrics do tell us that there was activity. And on the right is what leaders would generally need to know. They often don't even know enough to know that they could ask their L&D partners. So that's the big so what. Did performance improve? Did execution get stronger? Is there any meaningful result that moved the needle for the organization? And was this worth the time and investment that everyone put into it? One thing I like to do is, on my level 1 evaluation, the smiley sheet, is to ask an intention question around their intention to apply in the next 30 days to begin to get to the closer to the story around the so what. So I would say that this tension is where a lot of learning teams get stuck. It's not that we're necessarily doing poor work on the left side of the screen. It's answering some very base level questions, what I call butts and seats and smiley sheets. But it's not necessarily yet a strategic partner consulting to those business executives on the impacts. And what I find is this is a huge area of opportunity, not just for L&D, but for HR to really be value-added partners in general. When the questions aren't being asked by the executives of their L&D partners, and they're not being required of L&D and HR, L&D can be extremely busy, right? But it's not strategic. And the move that we have to make is from reporting what happened in the learning experience and how people felt about it to what's happening differently or not in the business. So that's the pivot that I want us to think about. So let's look at why measurement efforts often stop at that lower level left side of the screen before they even have a chance. So it usually breaks down before launch, not after launch. The most common mistake I would say is that we begin with the question, what shall we measure? And that does sound reasonable, but it's actually the wrong starting point. The first question we should really ask is, what will change if this works? So if we start with data of what will change, then we tend to collect. If we start with data, we tend to collect what's easy. But if we start with change, we're more likely to identify what's meaningful to the C-suite, to our sponsors. It's also, I would say, where some learning teams can overcomplicate things. You can build a really long list of metrics that you want to look at because you might not have a tight enough business link. And I would say to be careful with that. More metrics don't create stronger credibility. Clear alignment with business KPIs does. So many teams will try to bolt on measurement after the fact. At that point, you're often stuck with activity data because the desired performance shift were never clearly defined up at the beginning. So this move is simple, but it's really powerful. You begin with the change that the business needs, and you reverse engineer to work forward from there. So start with the end in mind, as they say. So that's where this line of sight framework is that I want to share with you. I think it's very helpful. So this is what I think is the simplest framework for making measurement more strategic and less painful. So again, you start with that business goal. What is the organizational priority that we're trying to support? And again, don't wait for the answer to come to you. Many times the C-suite don't know to ask you as the learning professional to contribute to this, but you can. So maybe the organizational priority is stronger management capability. Maybe it's lower turnover. Maybe it's faster ramp up time for new employees. Whatever it is, fewer customer issues, better safety performance, compliance performance, stronger succession readiness. Start with the business goal. Then after that, you can ask the second question, which I think is the most important one, which is what performance shift needs to happen for that business goal to move? So what would people need to do differently in the flow of work in order to reach that business goal? The third box is around defining the learning focus from there. So we know the business goal, we know what people would need to be doing or doing differently. So now what is the learning focus? So what capability or practice should the learning intervention build or reinforce to support that shift? And then, and only then, do you move to measures. So what are the leading indicators and the lagging indicators that would suggest contribution over time? So this framework matters because it keeps us from jumping from the business need straight to training delivery, or starting with training delivery and then trying to attribute causation to business KPIs, and keeps us from hoping that the smiley sheets or the LMS can rescue the story. So the sentence that I want you to remember in this is, if you cannot clearly define the performance shift, you cannot credibly measure impact. So let me bring this to life with a real example that I have. So leaders often want lagging indicators because they're where the real outcomes are. So we are on slide 15. Leaders often want lagging indicators because they feel, again, like real business results. Makes sense. But the lagging indicators, of course, they take time to show up in the business. So that's why the leading indicators on the left side of the screen matter so much. So they're the early signals that the intended behavior is actually beginning to take hold. So are managers using a coaching approach that you want them to? Are they holding the right types of conversations? Is the quality of execution improving? Whereas on the right side, the lagging indicators are the downstream business effects. It might be around retention trends or promotion readiness or quality, customer outcome measures, productivity, safety measures. Those are the established KPIs that the business or the talent team may have. Now, lagging indicators do take time to show up. So it's not really a good candidate for lagging indicators if you have a one-hit wonder, if you have a leadership retreat for a 2-day leadership retreat, to attribute lagging indicators would really be a jump. But for those types of long-term, tried and true types of programs, whether maybe it's onboarding, maybe it's a foundational leadership training, those are the kinds of things that measuring both leading earlier indicators as well as longer term lagging indicators are good candidates for. So I would say that creates the best, most credible evaluation approach to be able to do both. And if you only wait for the lagging indicators, you end up saying nothing for months, and people want those early indicators. And if you only do the early activity indicators, you're not actually getting to does it move the needle on business. So let me give you a second example where existing business measures were used rather than inventing new ones. So on page 16, we were working in a municipal setting, and one of the recurring realities in a municipal setting is that many supervisors are promoted because they're strong technicians and not because they already have built-in management capability. So the surface request may sound something like, we need supervisor training, but the more useful framing is, what organizational issue are we trying to improve? And in this case, it was supervisor consistency and the internal readiness for advancement. The performance gap showed up in day-to-day management practices where performance conversations were uneven or not occurring except, in the annual performance review. Expectations were not always clear. Feedback quality varied really significantly from one supervisor to another. And so being able to understand where the performance gaps were gave us a more precise learning focus. So we knew that there were gaps around coaching skills, around feedback practices, around consistent performance management behaviors. So instead of just saying we need supervisory training, we are starting to really dig into measurable specific areas of management behaviors. And because of that, we didn't have to invent a whole new measurement system. We looked at the measurement that the organization was already using. Talent had engagement signals, and they had 9-box succession readiness indicators. There were actual business indicators like production errors. They had other HR talent types of indicators like employee turnover, voluntary, involuntary, the number of employee relations claims, safety issues, compliance data. So we had a lot of measurements across the business. It's just nobody had thought for an L&D type of person to be asking to use this data. So this is an important point. Most of you are L&D and HR team members on this. And so again, I really want to emphasize you don't need to create new metrics. You often already have line of sight to these KPIs. And these, by the way, are the KPIs that the organization's already paying attention to. So let's make this more practical for you with more input in the chat, if you could. So moving into the next slide on 17, I'm going to ask you if you have a current program or initiative that you're working on, and what is the performance shift that it's supposed to support. So write, if you could, please, one sentence. Maybe it's an L&D program. You do have some other folks in here that might be looking more broadly in HR. So I'll give that a moment for you to add in the chat, please. So I have one that is around a new onboarding system. So ensuring that there's a new onboarding system in place. I have another around leadership training. So here's a good example of onboarding new sales associates. So what is the goal of that? The business goal is to reduce time to ramp up. To move beyond new onboarding system and to say it's really about reducing the time to proficiency to ramp up. We have another one, several folks around leadership, aspiring leadership, senior leadership. So leadership training, right? The goal could be, like I was sharing earlier, to have more consistent coaching conversations, feedback conversations, performance and development kinds of conversations. Leadership training, the goal could be around increasing employee production or reducing employee underperformance or absenteeism or whatever it is related to why we would have a leadership training initiative. You've got some advanced, I saw something around advanced leadership. So a goal for that could be increasing the pipeline of readiness for people to step into more senior leadership roles. We've got aspiring leader programs, very similar, right? The goal there is to prepare people for future leadership, to handle difficult conversations. Kristen has good. That's a more specific goal, so that the leadership development is now narrowed down in handling conflict and resolving issues in the workplace. Let me see what else I see. We've got others around working on better capturing billable hours. So that's, again, a very specific goal that is a business metric, and the learning is going to support and contribute to that business metric. Thank you, Tina. engagement and difficult conversations. We can measure that. I'll tell you, I had an organization I was working with at the beginning of COVID, and they moved to work remotely after managers were co-located with their sales associates, and the managers were, by their leadership, encouraged to be much more directive about needing to go out and hunt for new business with these very seasoned salespeople. And the salespeople were really pushing back. And so they did some pulse surveys around employee engagement. And the managers, we were working with doing some coaching with a subset of the managers. And we were able to do some specific coaching interventions for those managers related to showing up more engaging with difficult conversations. They did need their sellers to go out and hunt more, but to be able to be present to difficult conversations, to listen more effectively. And we found a 6% increase in their engagement scores of those managers that were going through our coaching program. And we also found a 4% increase ultimately in their hunting KPIs, their business metrics, their pipeline metrics, that nothing else had changed in that group compared to other groups, so that you could see that the direct correlation from the coaching, the learning intervention, and the employees were more engaged, felt listened to, and as a result, the difficult conversations de-escalated, and they were once again out hunting. So the more that you can get precise like this, the more you can really tell a story. I see another one around delegation and managers getting above the work to be able to do more strategic work. So very good. So I want you to notice that in what we're doing here, the shift is becoming more strategic. It's more strategic the moment you start articulating what is the performance shift that's expected to happen. So what matters is that people are doing something differently because of this intervention. So if that part is fuzzy, like we inherently know we need to do some sort of onboarding, no, what's the goal that you want on the tail end? If that part is fuzzy, then measurement will always feel sort of fuzzy. And so the more you can make that clear, and you all did a nice job in the chat on that, then you can really identify credible indicators pretty quickly, right? And again, these are metrics that the organization already has. So thank you for your inputs. Let me give you a third example where the performance question was not about training volume or smiley sheets. It was about retention. So this was a healthcare organization. The stated request was, we need more leadership training, leadership development. But when I really listened, the business issue was really about retention. Now, no executive told me that the issue was about retention. It's about us as problem solvers, as value-added consultants who are really listening for what is the underlying business issue that we're trying to address. So in this case, it was retention. And when you get to the underlying issue, it really changes the conversation. So if retention is the business issue, as it was here, then the question is, what are leaders doing or not doing that are contributing to retention risk? And so one shift here with the healthcare organization was about conducting stay conversations, stay interviews. And so leaders were not consistently having meaningful, timely conversations, helping people feel engaged, supported, that they were growing developmentally, that expectations were clear. They did meet with their employees weekly and more often in group settings, but it was about the work. It wasn't about stay conversations. And so the learning focus we determined wasn't going to just be a generic leadership content. It was going to be a specific set of manager behaviors that would reasonably contribute to retention that focused on stay interviews. So that being able to define it that way made the measures a lot clearer. So we had leading indicators that included the frequency and the quality of those conversations. We had lagging indicators that we could look at over time around the stabilization in retention patterns and reduced early exit in year one. And the point is not to overclaim, the point is not to over attribute, but it's to connect the learning effort to a defensible performance pathway. And in my experience, doing this, 30 years, I think, they typically business executives, HR executives don't ask L&D people to do this, but it doesn't stop us from doing it. In fact, this is our area of opportunity to really step up and create tremendous value to the organization, because I would argue that few people are doing this in other areas of HR or business operations or strategy, et cetera. So let's do one more quick interaction before we move to an implementation playbook. So another poll, if you could. So when you think about your own measurement efforts, to the extent that they get stuck, where would you say they most often get stuck? And it's okay. We've all been there. So maybe we haven't had that clear business alignment up front. That wouldn't be surprising, because a lot of business leaders don't know to link these things to learning initiatives. We focus again on those activity measures. I'll give you another minute. Okay, let's close out our poll and see what you think. Okay, so about a quarter of you said that the business alignment, that is the alignment between business or talent metrics with learning and development measures, were not clear up front. And a similar number said limited access to the KPI or performance data. And I would ask you, have you asked? Many L&D organizations are either in the HR organization or in the business. And so you often are in a matrix with others that you can say, hey, I want to see, to what extent this learning solution might impact X performance data. Have you asked to get access to that data? About 10% of you were feeling the pressure to prove ROI too quickly. And one area that shows the biggest opportunity, where the measurements often go astray, is when there's not enough manager reinforcement and follow through. That is, the manager of the participant in the learning. And so creating a whole solution that's not just targeting the learner, but also creating reinforcement tools and marketing and information for the manager of those participants, and holding both parties accountable through measures becomes very important. So I have a question. What prevents people from asking about the KPIs? And as I was saying, if you haven't asked, and I would say it's typically not thought of as an order taker a question to even ask. And so to say, tell me about your retention numbers. How much of your retention is your terms are voluntary versus involuntary? What does that look like? And I did a study with onboarding. We were onboarding new employees, and we in a sales organization, and we had a lot of turn. And sales typically has a lot of turn. But I said, let's look at the turn in an analytical way. And nobody from L&D or HR types of services had been asking those questions. So I said, can I see the data? And we looked at that, and what we saw was there were 2 points of where they were losing people at the 9-month mark and the 18-month mark. And then we looked further, and at the 9-month mark, they were involuntary term largely when people weren't doing the job that they needed to do successfully. These were salespeople. And at the 18-month mark, they were losing people voluntarily. That is, they were doing the job, but they were leaving. So in the first group, you could say, well, maybe they don't have the skills. That's why they're not successful at the job. So for those first folks that were losing them involuntarily at the 9-month mark, we were able to shore up the onboarding experience, both the formal onboarding with the training and formal learning and development, but all of the early on the job experiential learning, engaging the manager and the team around the people to help bring them up to speed more successfully. And as it turned out, on the 18-month term that was voluntary, it wasn't that they had a skill issue. They were performing their job fine. They didn't need a learning intervention. However, what we were able to do was to be a good partner and provide information that said, you're losing people at 18 months who are skilled workers. And through pulse surveys, et cetera, they were able to find out that it was a compensation issue. And then the HR compensation team was able to go and look at their solutions. So again, we're solving from holistic problems that historically an L&D specialist hasn't asked for. So whatever shows up in your poll, a lot of you had not a lot of pull through on the manager of the participant. The point is that measurement problems are often start in the discovery stage of the project and are in the design of the project from the beginning, that it's not just an analytical problem afterwards. Okay, so let me bring us to a simple implementation playbook that I think sort of puts this all together for us, and then we'll be getting ready for questions. So if you want to operationalize this quickly, here is a 5-step playbook. So number one, and we'll be getting, I believe the PowerPoint slides will be available, so you'll be able to see this. Number one, you want to start with that business goal. We've been talking about that, not the learning event. Resist the temptation to begin with the training program title, the curriculum. Resist the temptation to not ask the question. If the executive in HR or in the business don't ask the question, it doesn't mean that you don't ask the question. Make that your mantra. Step two, define what the performance goal, what the performance shift would need to be. Ask very plainly, what would people need to do or need to do differently if the effort is going to be successful? Step three is to design the learning and the reinforcement around that, right? So once you know that it's about behavioral interviews or stay interviews, having more coaching conversations, then you design the programs around that. Now, I'm an executive coach. I'm also an endurance athlete, and I know that behavior change matters and that it's really hard and that people need a lot more than just exposure at one point. They need all of the support structures like manager support we were just talking about. They need practice. They need opportunity for self-reflection, for feedback, for follow-up, for tools in the flow of what they do each day. That behavior change takes all of these levers to help move people along. Step four is choose a small number of indicators, maybe 1 or 2 leading indicators and 1 or 2 lagging indicators. Don't go crazy. It's not really about building a giant dashboard. It's about creating a storyline, a credible line of sight. And step 5, report the contribution clearly and consistently, not with inflated uncertainty, not with a lot of caveats, just with clear logic and honest evidence. I really have never, when I have initiated asking these questions that are not historically in an L&D swim lane, and creating an evaluation story. I have not really, as long as you don't overinflate the attribution, I have not really had executives push back that on them. It has helped create justification for programs, modifications for programs, scrapping of some programs, but being able to clearly and consistently tell a story is really critical for you to be truly a value-added strategic partner. I am often remind teams that understandable beats over-engineered, and so if leaders can't follow your story, or the story is not plausible, any amount of sophistication and nice PowerPoints won't help you. So I'd say, let me give you a few common pitfalls to avoid, so a few traps that are worth avoiding on slide 21. And then we'll get ready to open up for questions. So the first one is, as I was saying, measuring everything. Often when teams don't have a strong line of sight as to what the performance goal is and how to pick a couple of lead indicators and a couple of lagging indicators, they'll compensate by ask a lot of questions. If you've got a tried and true trainer in your onboarding program and they get great results, you don't need to keep asking about the trainer. Once in a while you do for quality check, but you don't need to keep measuring that just for the sake of measuring. It just creates noise and it's not really valuable. Another is measuring only what's easy. So again, those leading indicators that are activity indicators, those are easy, and so they're seductive because it's very available, but it's not always meaningful enough to get to the business KPIs. So again, ask for the data if you've never done that before. This third question pitfall is the over-attribution, the over-claiming. So I know that we in L&D rarely control the business results. We can have the greatest program in the world, and at best, it contributes to those results. But again, there are not a lot of folks who are telling this story, and if not you, who? So be careful not to promise causation when the true, honest story is contribution, right? Because then we lose credibility. And then the fourth thing is waiting for the perfect data. So a lot of you said I didn't have access to the data. Well, you may not get pipeline data and revenue data and things like that, but there is business talent data that you do have if only you ask. And so if you do wait for the perfect data, you'll often end up saying nothing at all. So I'd say that strong reporting is in your discovery stage, starting with a disciplined logic of where you want to go, where you want the organization, where the organization wants to go, and reverse engineer with reasonable evidence, not perfection. So I would say that measurement can't just be a reporting add-on afterwards. It needs to be considered in that discovery stage and in the design stage. Otherwise, you may be telling the wrong story, or the story will just simply be weaker than it could have been. So just a couple of takeaways that I hope we can stay with you today as we wrap up. Again, on the next slide 22 is to start with the business goal. I think we've hammered that home. Don't wait for the HR lead or your business lead, a C-suite, to tell you what that business goal is. Ask the questions to try and help them figure out what the business goal might be, and define from there what the business shift needs to be, what the performance shift needs to be. If people are not doing something now or not doing it well, what that needs to look like. Again, whether it's business or talent KPIs, use those existing KPIs whenever possible. And for programs that are more than one-hit wonders, pair leading with lagging indicators. So you're telling a comprehensive story. And again, you're not move beyond activity, butts in seats and smiley sheets, to look at really measuring the contribution overall. So learning earns credibility when it's tied to those performance shifts that the business executives most care about. And again, when we stay at those levels of activity, attendance, completion, satisfaction, we look organized. We have good PowerPoints telling the business that they loved our training, but our training budgets still get slashed. So why? Because we don't necessarily look strategic and creating value to the bottom line. So when we connect learning to the work and the performance, we show a story of contribution, that whole conversation changes and you are at the table as a value-added strategic partner. So it does not require perfect ROI study. It just requires clear alignment, good questions in your discovery stage, stronger design choices, and more discipline around the reporting. So we have about 9 minutes. Let's open it up for questions and discussion if we can. Love to hear from you. If no one prompts, we might get out a little early, but let's see what kind of questions we might see. So where does connecting learning to business feel most challenging in your organization? So there's a question about how to do this when leadership still expects completion rates and satisfaction scores. So, right. So again, I'm not saying abandon those. I'm saying don't do those exclusively. If you didn't set up the so what question in your discovery and design phase, you're going to end up just reporting those common low hanging fruit of smiley sheets and butts and seats. And you're not really showing the value to the organization that you could be. And when you do this, there's another question at what happens when you get in under the hood. You're asking this kind of question and you find out it's not a skill issue. And that happened when I used the example of in a voluntary term at 18 months, those people were producing, those sellers were producing, and they were still leaving. So we knew that they didn't have a skill issue because they were producing effectively. And so what I did was I was able to sort of like a Blue's Clues. It's a clue. Okay, they're not leaving. We don't have to give them more training. They have some other issue that's going on. And then that gives an opportunity through the exit interviews, et cetera, and find out that the culture, it was in that case, a compensation or culture issue. I have a question. Are there tools that can take in inputs from the multiple learning systems along with business measuring tools and make it easy to create the analytics and tie them all together? It's a good question. We have our partners at Trainery that has some very robust tools around analytics. But I would say you can start without over engineering this, Tom. You can start with a couple of leading indicators and a couple of lagging indicators. And you don't have to make a fancy dashboard or something. You're the one sort of bringing that all together. Another person is looking to connect the learning to business outcomes, but is challenged around managing a large acquisition, migrating the acquisition, and the existing positions that are in place and how you bring in those new folks, I guess, through the acquisition and mirror the current skill set with those positions. I would say, there's an opportunity to drill down into defining the competencies and the skills that are required in those positions, and creating transparency around what those skills and competencies are, and that's we'll start the ball rolling in in that space. Another question around what if we don't have access to good data or KPIs? How do we still show impact? First of all, I challenge if you ask for it, HR talent types of data or business KPI data, more than likely your sponsors and your partners will be happy to help you with that. But if not, I mentioned earlier, one thing I do like to do is within the things that I can control within the L&D solution. For example, the smiley sheet, each and every one of my smiley sheets captures intention to apply on the job. And then later, 30 days, 45 days, we get back to the people and we ask them, okay, you said you intended to apply this on the job. To what extent are you? And to the extent that you are or are not, why or why not? So you have participant self-reported data that says, I'm not doing it I intended guns blazing at the end of training to try something new, but 45 days later, I'm not doing it. And why do they self-report? They're not doing it because my manager is not reinforcing it, because I don't have time, because I'm not quite sure that I'm skilled enough to practice it yet. And so asking intention to apply at the end of the intervention and then following up 30 or 45 days later about did you apply, why or why not, what were the measures, the levers, can at least get you some information about application, even if they're not tied to the business metrics themselves. And I have one more, which is how do you talk about impact when so many factors influence the results, right? So I talk about contribution more than causation in that regard. So we're getting to the top of the hour here, and I think we've had a good conversation, a lot of questions. Just to wrap it up and give you my contact information on the final slide. Thank you for spending the hour with me. If you would like to continue the conversation, please do feel free to reach out. I appreciate the engagement, the work that you do to make learning more meaningful and more connected to the business outcomes matters. I have been doing ROI work for 30 years, and the so what is at the heart of everything that I do. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat. Thank you.